Hello everybody, welcome to our monthly live stream. Try to do at least every 3 weeks, every month or so, something like that. So yeah, welcome everybody. It's great to be back and yeah, talk about some of the recent contents that we've been doing on the channel. Really talk about this Middle-Platonism seminar that we've started, that I am terrified is going to consume my entire life somehow, which I guess would not be the worst thing, but it's proving to be a huge project, just like the Merkava seminar proved to be a huge project, just like the Agrippa seminar also proved to be a huge project. So these seminars become pretty massive undertakings, and so I'm pretty stoked to get underway with it, and I'll talk a little bit more about sort of where we're going here in just a little bit. But yeah, welcome folks to the live stream. Feel free to throw your questions down into the chat. Hopefully I'll get to some questions here in just a few minutes. I have about an hour and a half to be streaming, so yeah, feel free to throw your questions in the chat, and hopefully get some questions as we get yeah, we'll get some questions in the chat, stuff like that. Well, what's been going on the channel? What have we been working on? Let me see. Let's sort of pull up the stuff we've been working on. Yeah, I did an episode just recently on the Iyun circle, which is a topic that I find just endlessly fascinating. That is to say that the material on sort of the early proto-Kabbalah and the really early proto-Kabbalah stuff is just really fascinating to me, because again, we take for granted that the Kabbalah was always going to be the kind of Kabbalah that it became. That is to say, the 10 Sfirot, or the Lurianic system, or what have you. An ambulance is coming down my street. Hopefully not for me. Full shlama to those folks. But yeah, we're looking at sort of the early Proto-Kabbalah, and really got into some of the Kabbalistic stuff that I find just really interesting, and that is to say, the period of time around the time that the Sefer Bahir was being composed, and around the time that the Iyun circle was being composed, and again, a system of 13 Sfirot as opposed to 10, and that was just again really fascinating material that that I was really enthusiastic about getting into. And yeah, so great stuff there with the Iyun circle. And then it did an episode that didn't really perform very well. I'm not sure why folks didn't like it, but an episode on the technical Hermetica. Is the sound not sounding good? Hold on, let me see, make sure that my sound settings are right. Aha, that's why. There we go. Does that sound better? That should be on this mic now. Sorry, folks. I don't know why StreamYard randomly changes my my settings. Just let me know, folks, if that is working correctly, if the sound sounds better now. Great, because it was picking up the sound directly on the camera, which is obviously not where I want it to picking up. So great. Okay, good. Sorry about that, folks. Always something on these live streams. But great. But yeah, so we covered the system of the 13 Sefirot. But I think that calling them 13 Sfirot is a little... it's a point I didn't make as clearly as I could have in the episode, where clearly in the Sefer Zohar, it's clear that in the Sefer Zohar, all 10 Sfirot are emanations of the divine, although the text never really even uses the term Sfirot. But in the Zohar, that's definitely the case. But in the Sefer Bahir and in the Iyun material, that is less so the case. And in fact, it only seems like the first 3 Sfirot are actually divine emanations, or divine moments of divine autogenesis. But in the Sefer, in the Iyun material, in that material, it's just those first 3. So it seems like the 10 that fall after that are kind of divine furniture. You know, it's the Chayot and the throne and stuff like that. So it's interesting that the EU material refers to them as Sfirot, but this just shows you that the term Sfirot, which is a neologism found first in the Sefer Yetzirah, that this wasn't this term wasn't understood at all. It's not even clear what it means in the Sefer Yetzirah. Even translating as emanations, I think, is wrong in that text. And clearly, I think what they mean by sphirot in that text is something like numerations. And so the Sefer Yetzirah has this very Pythagorean feel to it. But it's a whole different system entirely. But at any rate, yeah, like I said, I did an episode on the technical Hermetica, and specifically the most famous text of the technical Hermetica, the Corinthians. And it's a pity that that it didn't go over very well. It seems like you guys weren't terribly interested in the technical Hermetica, which is interesting that that's the closest overlap we actually have of something like Hermetic magic. And with something like Hermetic magic, I thought folks would be really interested in it. And the Corinthians is pretty understudied, but it didn't perform very well. Folks did not seem terribly interested in it, so I'm not sure why. Maybe you can let me know in the chat if you didn't watch the episode, what about it was uninteresting to you? Because I'm always interested in what does well and what doesn't do well on the channel. So yeah, tell me what you think about what sort of didn't interest you about the technical Hermetica. But the big news on the channel, of course, is that we have now gotten about 2 episodes deep into this Middle-Platonism seminar. And that Middle-Platonism seminar, I've heard someone say that that the auto captioning calls it Metal-Platonism, which is somehow appropriate. But the Middle-Platonism material is just absolutely crucial in the understanding of all this material in Western esotericism. And it's material that very rarely gets studied, even in departments where you have a classics program. And it's a pity that it doesn't get more studied. And so part of the reason why I wanted to do this whole seminar on Middle Platonism is just to show that Western esotericism and philosophy more generally is just absolutely, it's indispensable for describing the kinds of things that ultimately become Hermeticism and Gnosticism and really even just Christianity. You don't get Christianity off the ground intellectually without Middle Platonism. There just is no Christian theology. It just doesn't exist without Middle Platonism, specifically someone like Philo. Philo's very survival is in some sense, the literature of Philo's survival is basically testimony to this. So I'm going to get out. So yeah, I'm going to be getting into this just because I think that it's so indispensable. And as we've gotten into it, we're already seeing the material like Speusippus, and we'll get to next week, or this weekend rather, we'll get to Xenocrates and Polemon, and we'll get into it and we'll see just how important and how influential this material is. Of course, we covered Speusippus last week, and Speusippus is just such a, I don't know, bizarre is not exactly the right word because I don't like to call people bizarre, but he's clearly such an innovative thinker that we often just don't know what to do with him, at least the fragments of what we have from him. So we just don't know what even to do with Speusippus at some level. But, I think about his sort of system of syzygies, it seems like, generating 5 different ontologically distinct registers of reality, with every distinct register of reality having its own first principles. That alone is almost unheard of in contemporary philosophy, which is just to say it's almost unheard of to have a system of philosophy whereby one generates a metaphysics, or rather there is a plural metaphysics. Typically we think of metaphysics as just being the one metaphysics that governs all dimensions of reality, from the realm of the gods all the way down to the realm of that tatters off into non-being. We think of typically there being just one realm that is governed by all of metaphysics. Metaphysics governs that entire realm. And it's interesting that Speusippus rejected that and seemed to have believed that every realm has its own distinct ontological register, and that those distinct registers obeyed their own metaphysical principles. Now, we don't know exactly how Speusippus did this or how he understood it. We only have glimpses very vaguely about how he did this. But again, it's an interesting insight into how diverse and how multiform metaphysics was in this early period. So, so again, I think that this is a fascinating material. It'll get even more interesting as we get into the later the later Middle Platonists. We're going to get into Antiochus of Escalon here in a couple of weeks. And again, we get these strange combinations, these really wonderful combinations of things like, combinations of Platonism and Stoicism, which again, for most of us, we've all been taught that Platonism is an inherently idealist system, and Stoicism is a radically materialist system. And yet we're going to see in someone like Antiochus of Escalon a clear combination of Platonism and Stoicism and Aristotelianism, for that matter. And it's going to be that combination that's really going to give us Middle Platonism, and it's going to be that philosophical machinery that is going to spawn out Hermeticism and Gnosticism and Christianity, Alexandrine Judaism, at least the weird Judaism of Philo of Alexandria. And so it's going to be extremely productive of thought, especially as we get into the Roman imperial period. And of course, that's the cradle for basically Western civilization. So a lot's going on in this material, and I'm really glad to be able to get to it. And again, I'm only able to do that because of you guys. The generous support of my Patreon community, who's able to basically crowdfund this free open access education, and just folks like you who support the channel by leaving comments or just hanging out, leaving super chats, using the supers on the channel to donate money. It helps to keep the lights on and keep this kind of material going. So I'm really grateful for all of that. But upcoming material, I don't know. I've been so consumed with this Middle Platonism business that I've had a difficult time getting the Middle Platonism blinders off. So I'm really wondering about exactly what I want to do next on the channel in terms of content creation. But I think what I might cover is maybe the most obscure Gnostic book ever written. In fact, it's so obscure that that it doesn't even have a title. It's just called the Untitled text in the Bruce Codex, and it's a fabulous little book. Not little; it's actually quite extensive. It's 50 pages or something. But I think the next thing I'm going to be covering is the Untitled text in the Bruce Codex. So maybe tackling that next. So but yeah, really interesting stuff. It's also neat about sort of Gnostic liturgy. There may be elements of Gnostic liturgy actually in the Untitled Codex. It seems like some of those texts in there were liturgical, which is again very interesting because often we don't get Gnostic literature in terms of liturgical material, and so getting some Gnostic liturgical material could be interesting for lots of reasons. But let's get some questions. Let's just start getting some questions and do some Q&A, and see what folks are interested in talking about today. So let me scoot up a little bit so I can see my little screen a little better. Yeah, thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate that. Very grateful. Yeah, feel free to folks use the supers if you like. I'll definitely try to get to those, and also try to get to other folks as well. So, all right, let me just get some. Especially if you have questions about the Middle Platonism seminar, I'd love to get to those. When am I going to make an episode on Zeno of Citium? Zeno of Citium, of course, is famously the founder of the partisans of the porch, as I like to call them, the Stoics. I don't know that I'll make an episode on Zeno of Citium. I'll mention him this weekend on the Middle Platonism seminar, because Zeno is obviously he's taught by Crates and Polemon, so he's sort of academy adjacent. And because he's kind of academy adjacent, I'll mention Zeno. But the Stoics are going to play a huge part in this whole Middle Platonism seminar. So we'll talk a lot about The Stoics, especially the middle Stoa, is going to matter a lot, especially people like Posidonius. So yeah, there'll be a lot of talk about the middle Stoa, but we'll talk a little bit about the old Stoa in this upcoming lecture. But I doubt I'll do an episode on Zeno of Citium. Yeah, any recommendations for someone wanting to learn more about Kabbalah? It depends on what do you want to learn. I mean, Kabbalah is a huge field. I did a whole, I don't know, 15-part, 12-part introductory lecture series on introducing the Kabbalah. So if you want to get more into Kabbalistic studies, that's a good place to start. I think I also included a pretty extensive bibliography in that class, if I remember correctly. But the oldies but goldies are good. Gershom Scholem and Moshe Adel. They get more. You get more up there with people like Elliot Wolfson, which really, the intersection of Kabbalah and philosophy. Malila Kellner Eshed, if you're really interested in Zohar studies, Yehuda Libes. So tons of people to be studying when it comes to Kabbalah and Zohar and material like this. Of course, a lot of that is in Hebrew, a lot of it in modern Hebrew. So that's a little limiting if you don't have Hebrew, but there's still a ton in English. Yeah, to do some more on Iamblichus and Proclus. Yeah, I definitely will. There's a lot to be done in Iamblichus and Proclus. In fact, one of the things I'd love to do, I need to come back to Iamblichus because I want to do a little bit more on theurgy in the De Mysteries. But in Proclus, there's just the enormous amount of commentaries. And some of his commentaries, like his commentary on the Phaedrus and stuff, are just extremely interesting. So I think that I might come back and talk a little bit about Proclus's commentary literature and try to zoom in on some of those commentaries. In fact, I even thought about doing a seminar just on Proclus's commentaries because there's so much going on in those commentaries, and some of our best insights into late pagan religious praxis, specifically Platonic religious praxis, are only recorded really in those commentaries. So it's in some of those that we really get some of the more juicy artifacts of what sort of liturgical paganism looked like as a interlocutor and rival with Christianity. So that's all really fascinating stuff. But also I think there's for whatever reason I noticed this is true, and I notice it's true generally. People have a bias against commentary literature. And maybe this is just weird because I come from a culture in which commentary literature is just, that's everything. Like we are a commentary writing people, and so were the ancient pagans. As early as Polemon, as early as these guys, they're writing commentaries on the Timaeus, and Theophrastus is writing commentaries on Aristotle. And the commentary literature is just a part and parcel of the ancient world and the medieval world. But for whatever reason, people these days have a real allergy to commentary literature, which I find to be deeply unfortunate and I don't know, deeply unfortunate and also just intellectually stultifying. I mean, what is better than really smart people writing their thoughts on really smart literature? It just seems like the best of all possible worlds, but we really prioritize originality over commentary, and I really find that's a pity. But I love commentary literature, but it seems like most people these days have a kind of bias against it. But yeah. How about a video on John Scotus Erigena, John the Irishman? I think that the main reason why I haven't done a video on Erigena is because, one, my buddy Zevi over at Seekers of Unity has already done a really fantastic deep dive on John Scotus Erigena in a way that there's not a lot I would add. I think his video is really, really good, and therefore why make another video that is basically redundant to his video? So that's the first thing. I might do an episode on early medieval Neoplatonism. There's a lot to be covered there that's interesting. Or maybe Abelard, talking about how Abelard as a kind of anti-Erigena and the rise of nominalism and the early debates between nominalism and realism, as witnessed by people like Origena and Boethius. So, so I may do that. But if you want a really good episode on John Scotus Origena, just go check out Seekers of Unity's video. Zevi's video is extremely good. All right, let's keep going. Okay. All right, folks, I'm just going to grab some questions here. I got some super chats. Built a board game based on Solomonic magic, and I'm curious if you'd be open to consulting for historical mythological accuracy. That's cool that you made a game based on Solomonic magic. That's as much as there is a such thing as Solomonic magic. Thank you, Gal Sofair. I don't know. Right now, I don't have the capacity, just to be very honest. With between teaching this class and all the other things that I have on my plate right now, I probably don't have capacity to check it. But I do think it is really cool that you did it. And yeah, I mean, it'd be cool to see it at some point to see kind of what you've come up with. But that's a really cool project. Let me see here. Sorry, folks, just moving a couple things around so I can see them a little better. Nice, I can pop the chat out of this thing here. All right, but yeah, really cool that you've done a Solomonic game. But yeah, I don't think I have time to do that. Do I plan on doing a video on Joachim of Fior or the Beguines of the Beguards? I've already done an episode on the Beguines. So I've done a sort of introductory episode on the Beguines. Then I've zoomed in on specific Beguines, so I've really zoomed in on Heidewig and people like that. There's not a lot on the Beguards that I know of. I don't know of any big studies on the Beguards, so I would study then. But yeah, I'd also like to do an episode on the spiritual Franciscans. The spiritual Franciscans are just one of the most persecuted sects by the church. Everyone always talks such a big game about the so-called Cathars and the Waldensians, but people forget that the spiritual Franciscans were viciously targeted by the church, and it runs up against some alchemy stuff, right? With John of Rupesisha, he was attached at least in some ways to the spiritual Franciscans. So yeah, I need to do an episode on the spiritual Franciscans and on Joachim of Fior. The problem with doing one on Joachim is that his literature is just so resistant to summary that it's hard to kind of summarize what he was doing. And also, he wrote and rewrote his material on so many occasions that it gets difficult to tease out exactly what his system was. How is he dividing history, and what are these different processes by which it's unfolding and things like that. But yeah, definitely like to do one on Joachim. So, in fact, I even have a book of Joachim of Fior, just like right here. This is a you never know what you're going to be in arm's reach of here in Esoterica land, but this is a 1589 edition of the prophecies, the papal prophecies of Joachim of Fior. So I literally have here, and this book is famous. It needs some restoration work done. Unfortunately, it's kind of the binding is the sewing is quite loose, but you can see here some of the great woodcuts that have ultimately traveled with Joachim of Fior's material. But at any rate, a 16th century copy of Joachim. So yes, I'm interested in him so much so that I literally have early modern copies of his books. All right. So, if Paul was a proto-Merkava mystic, how might his conception of the resurrected bodies have developed without Platonic influence? Would it have been spiritual or physical or something else? Um, so, I think the question you're kind of getting at is Merkava mysticism is interesting because it shows little to no influence of Platonism. There's very little influence of Platonism onto the Merkava mysticism, but that doesn't mean that Paul wasn't influenced by it. And I think Paul very much was influenced by it. Paul's very much in the world of Middle Platonism, and therefore I think that that one, there is already a conception in Judaism of resurrection, a pretty developed conception of resurrection found all the way in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there is some sense of angelification. And angelification and resurrection seem to have been combined in Paul's thinking, where the physical body is, whereas for rabbinic ideas, the physical body is resurrected. But for Paul, the physical body is transformed. And it's transformed in following after Jesus' transformation into a kind of glorified body, into a kind of angelic body. And so I think that this idea of resurrected bodies and glorified bodies tracks more to the process of angelification that we find in Merkava literature and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but also I think Paul could have access to some of these ideas coming in from Middle Platonism as well. So Paul has access as a Greek speaking Jew to a pretty wide range of material, intellectual material, spiritual material that he could draw from as he's developing the apparatus of his theology. And so I think that here we have where he's putting them into dialogue with each other. But I think that the place to look at the resurrection theories of Paul is in the glorification, like the hymn of glorification in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think is a pretty great precursor to what Paul's imagining in terms of the resurrected Christ and everyone else is going to get resurrected. Listening to your lectures on alchemy while doing my lab work got me feeling like a modern enlightened magus. You are a modern enlightened magus. All of your alchemical ancestors would be more than jealous of the work that you get to do in a modern lab. So thank you. But yes, pour out one for the ancestors, but don't pour out anything toxic. But good luck with your lab work. Yeah, Marjorie Kemp video. Yeah, I think that I'll eventually get to Marjorie. The only reason why I haven't gotten to the sort of bigger lady mystics, Julian of Norwich and Margaret Kemp or Teresa of Avila, is just because they're kind of well known. Right now, like, people know them. They've gotten a following. They're pretty well known. Whereas, I can reach over here to the next lady I want to do. How many people are kicking with Catherine of Genoa? No one knows about Catherine of Genoa. She's a pretty obscure 16th century lady mystic. And if I have to, if I want to spend my time covering lady mystics, which I do, women in the history of esotericism is crucially important and woefully understudied. I'd rather sort of dive deeper into some of the lesser known mystics like Elizabeth of Schönau rather than do Julian of Norwich, because I think there's already good content on Julian of Norwich. So that's basically why. It's not that I'm ignoring the Teresa of Avila. It's just that Teresa of Avila has a lot of light already directed at her in a way that Elizabeth of Schönau, not so much. Although, interestingly enough, Elizabeth and Hildegard talk to each other. So it's like two lady mystics exchanging letters, which is kind of a neat moment between the mystic ladies. So yeah, Margaret of Kemp, but I think she'll probably come further down the line when I cover, I don't know, I know I have Catherine of Genoa I want to do next. There's a couple. Let's see. So I don't know if you've seen Professor Wout Hanegraaff's lecture, Metaphysical Foundations of Radical Empiricism. It's on YouTube. That's good to know. If yes, I'm interested in your thoughts. His position expounded there might be radical to the point of being self-undermining. I've not seen it. So I'll have to take a look at it. I appreciate the hint. I'm always curious about where Professor Hanegraaff's thought is these days. But I'll definitely have to check out what his arguments. So always, again, folks probably know Professor Hanegraaff was my teacher when I was at the University of Amsterdam, and I very much am glad to live in his shadow. Where do you think African syncretism and diasporic religion fits in with esotericism? Have you read about it or read anything interesting about it? I haven't read a lot about African syncretism and diasporic religion, hoodoo and voodoo, but I mean, there's a huge amount of esotericism, especially in the late 19th and 20th century. I mean, I think of things like the 5% Nation, which has an elaborate metaphysics and mythology and numerology, the sort of it's higher mathematics and stuff. So there's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things there. I just happen to not know much about them because I basically don't work in the sort of period of time where most of those advances and most of those interesting things happen. So they're certainly interesting. They're just out of my field. You know, my knowledge of esotericism kind of runs off a cliff at about 1650. And, by the time we get good oral written down literature about hoodoo and voodoo and Haitian stuff and, obviously 5% Nation and stuff like that, that's way into a later period where I just don't know anything about it. But absolutely fascinating material, well worth studying, but not something I can cover, mostly just because I'm ignorant. This is a great question. Would you ever consider doing a video on the influence of esotericism in Russia, or is that moving too far east? I don't think of Russia as the East. I guess my sense of what's East is like East begins in India. Like you got to cross a mountain or something. Once you cross the Urals, you're in the East. Once you cross the Himalayas or something, then you're in the East. I tend to think of Persia as being part of the Western world. Persia, Iraq, North Africa. I think of all of that being the West, which is a strange debate in esotericism these days, where some people want to drop the Western from Western esotericism. But for me, it's just like we just need to open up the concept of what the West is, because Persian astrology is underwriting, and some of which is coming from India, but Persian astrology is underwriting a great deal of what becomes astrology as it gets mixed with Hellenistic astrology. So we just need to shift what we think of West is over into into Arab lands and ultimately into Persia. But I consider Russia, part of the West. I don't know a lot about esotericism in Russia. I have to admit that I'm strongest in the Latin world, so in the Western European areas. Even my knowledge of the Greek church fathers is relatively meager compared to what it could be if I were more focused on that. So I'm much stronger on Tertullian than I am someone like Chrysostom, Gregor Nyssa or something. So even that area, the Greek Christian world going up into Russia, it's just an area that I'm pretty ignorant about, honestly. To my great detriment, to be sure, but it's not an area I know a ton about. But there is a part of me where that changes is after the Bolshevik Revolution, where I do know a little bit about Russian history after the Bolshevik Revolution and into the Soviet period. And there's a great book on mysticism and esotericism in the Soviet Union. And I've thought about doing an episode on esotericism in the Soviet Union, maybe do something on the God Builders. I find that to just be an extremely fascinating topic. Bogdanov and the God Builders and those guys. So maybe something more in Soviet times. But before that, I just don't know a ton and wouldn't be able to do it justice, I don't think. Interaction of law and esotericism in the Middle Ages? Yes. A lot. A whole lot. There's a ton. I don't know exactly what you would want me to say. An episode that I want to do actually is I want to do an episode on Pope John the 22nd, which I know that just sounds like a random pope. Like if you hit random on the Pope creator machine, you get John the 22nd or something. But John the 22nd is probably the most important pope in the history of Western esotericism, because it's really John the 22nd that really shines a light on the practice of sorcery and alchemy, and really gets the church as an institution and the Inquisition as an institution interested in the question of witchcraft, alchemy, magic, sorcery, etc. And he's going to dramatically change the degree to which the church was active in the persecution of folks perceived to be practicing magic and alchemy and things like that. So, yeah, I think an episode I would like to do in terms of the law and esotericism is specifically canon law and esotericism, and talk about how Pope John the 22nd dramatically shaped how esotericism was perceived in Western Europe. Thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate that. Thank you. I absolutely adore your channel. Thank you. I was wondering if you would ever do an episode on Leo Strauss. It's a complicated figure for me. That's putting it mildly. Leo Strauss is an extremely complicated figure. I would like to do an episode on Leo Strauss, on his whole concept of esoteric writing. Maybe to look at Maimonides as an example of esoteric writing. Maimonides famously, and Strauss writes about this at length in, I think, the first chapter of the book, where he points out the fact that Maimonides seems to say one thing and believe another. Right? Maimonides is famous, infamous, in the Guide to the Perplexed for dissimulating, and specifically dissimulating on whether he thinks the world is eternal or not. And in the text, he says, no, the world's not eternal. It was created from nothing by God. But then he kind of does these wink, wink, nudge, nudge moments where he seems to indicate that he might not really believe that. And therefore, Strauss argues, and this is a complicated argument, that underneath the hood of Maimonides' dissimulation are actually heretical views. And by the way, this is not new to Maimonides. Before Maimonides did this, Averroes did this. Averroes would say things like in his famous fatwa about the ability of philosophy and Islam to co-live together. He will say things like, you can't disbelieve in punishment after death. Of all the things that you can believe are metaphors, that one you cannot believe is a metaphor. It's really real. And when you look at his long commentary on the soul, he doesn't seem to believe that. He seems to believe that there may not be an afterlife in that sense. So this is, again, the whole topic of esoteric writing is really, really interesting, and Strauss has the most famous book on it. So yeah, maybe that's a place to take a look at his case study of Maimonides. So any thoughts on Franz Bardon? I don't have any thoughts on. I've never read anything that Franz Bardon ever wrote. It's like 20th century stuff, so I've never read it. So not good to have opinions about stuff that you've never read. At least not good to have opinions. But yeah, Darwin's Daydream. Thank you for becoming a channel member. Again, helps to keep the lights on. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, let's get some other questions from folks in the crowd. That's a good question. Any time I'll be covering Nama. Nama, of course, famously doubles as both the wife of Noah, but also she's an important demon in the Gemara, along with Agrat Bamachalat. So she's kind of one of the trifecta of the demons of the Talmud. So yeah, maybe I'll do an episode on Nama. Maybe I team up with the always lovely Miriam Manzabin to do an episode on Nama, because Miriam does such great work on that material. So it'd be great to work with her on that. So yeah, maybe we team up and do an episode on Nama. All right. Let's see here. Scooch this out a little bit. Yeah, I think someone asked about the Franz Bardon stuff, and people often think that I know a lot more about esotericism than I actually do. People think that I know about 20th century stuff. So people ask me questions about, what do you think about Manly P. Hall? And I'm like, I don't know anything about Manly P. Hall. I've never read anything he's ever written. I don't work in the 20th century. I don't really work in the 19th century. Um, you know, admittedly, I don't even have a lot of interest in 20th century esotericism. So that's not to say it's not interesting. I just happen to not be terribly interested in it. And that's true of all kinds of stuff. You know, even with like Yehuda Ashlag and like 20th century Kabbalah, I'm like, I guess it's kind of interesting, but I'd much rather get into Cordovero or something. All right, let me scroll up and grab some other folks' questions and chats. All right. This is a great question from Ashley. Do you suspect any of the mystics to be exaggerating or fabricating their divine experiences in order to further their own ideas within the church? Maybe our girl Hildegard. This is a great question. You know, the short answer is yes. Yes. I think that there's always the experience that people are having, and then there's the narrative about the experience, and then there's the edited version. And I'm pretty sure that in the game of telephone, even with yourself, you clean things up, you dress things up, you make them a bit more tidy, you extract moral messages from them in the case of our girl Hildegard. So when we get these narrative records of mystical experiences, are we getting the mystical experience? Of course not. Are we even getting a direct, summation of it? No, I don't think so. I think we're getting a very polished gem, that is very much from the rough of some kind of experience. Now, do I think that Hildegard's fabricating things? I don't know. It's so hard to say. It's not for me to say, that I think she's lying or something like that. But is she ambitious? Is Hildegard ambitious? Absolutely. Now, she's playing a dangerous game because one woman's mysticism is another man's heresy. And so it could actually completely get her in trouble. But it didn't. It actually allowed her to climb the social ladder and get in good with church authorities and stuff like that. But it's absolutely the case that she was ambitious, and that one of the ways of continuing that ambition is to, lightly polish these experiences that you might be having. So, I don't know. It's hard to say that I wouldn't claim that she's, making stuff up, but polishing, I certainly think that's just inevitable. I think that's just inevitable. Do an episode on Asmodeus. Yeah, I could do an episode on Asmodeus. There's a lot of great stuff in the Gemara about Asmodeus, and he has certainly a ton of material that could be covered from there. Yeah, I'll do that. Anytime the algorithm is running low, you can always just do an episode on a demon, and the algorithm loves those. I think the algorithm itself is a demon, so I can do those. But yeah, maybe one on Asmodeus at some point soon. All right. The question, since you're going to make more episodes about Neoplatonism, would you consider making an episode about Avicenna's emanation and returning of the soul and the age and intellect? So, yes, I do want to make an episode on the age and intellect. The problem, and maybe I should say a little bit about what the age and intellect is. There's an incredibly weird section of Aristotle where Aristotle, well, let me back up. For Aristotle, all motion is either something causing something to move or something moving itself. Only things with intelligence move themselves, according to Aristotle. And therefore, he thinks that the mind as a thing needs to be moved either by us or by something else, and we can't move our own mind, right? There's nothing there to move our mind, and therefore he thinks that something must be activating the mind. This is sometimes referred to as the agent intellect or the active intellect. And this active intellect is it's mysterious what it is, but Aristotle thinks that it's eternal and that it is sort of separate from our minds. And when you get into Islamicate, even as early as Theophrastus, but definitely by Islamicate philosophy, A lot of work is being done to ponder what the agent intellect is, and usually the theory is that it's God's mind. That God's mind is the agent intellect, and this is how we do prophecy. That our mind communes with the agent intellect. That's what Maimonides thought. So it's a huge topic. The problem is it's just massive. I mean, if you just see Avicenna's book on the mind, his commentary, or Averroes, Ibn Rushd's commentary, two commentaries on Aristotle's book De Anima, they are just absolutely massive. And then that's not even counting the Christianity stuff. So the agent intellect could be a whole seminar. That could just be a seminar all on its own. You could do a whole seminar on the agent intellect and starting with Aristotle's De Anima and going. So yeah, I want to do an episode on it, but it's just such a difficult topic that it's going to require me, it's going to require such an investment that it's just going to take a long time to do it, and I just need to get it planned out long enough to do it. But I will say that the agent intellect is probably the most important and now discarded idea from medieval philosophy. And the agent intellect did enormous heavy lifting for medieval philosophy, Islamic, Jewish, Christian. Now it's just a relic. It's a fossil that only I think medieval philosophy will ever talk about. Most when you really lay this at the feet of Descartes really killed the agent intellect, and so it's not a topic that anyone discusses now, but incredibly important for understanding medieval philosophy. So yeah, I'd love to do an episode on it because it is so crazily important. All right, let's scroll down and get some of the other ones. Thank you for tuning me into the Blackbeard. Yeah, that's a great Blackbeard's awesome. Are there any unifying themes in First Nations? I think the U.S. uses the term Indian or Native American religious practices in North America, variations on animism. I don't know. I'm not an expert in North American indigenous religions. I'm sure they're just as complicated as I'm sure they're wildly complex, but I don't know anything about First Nations or indigenous North American religiosity, spirituality, just because it's not my area. But yeah, I can't say any specific thing about it. And even the topic of animism, it's such a 20th century concept that it's not a concept that does a lot of heavy lifting for me and what I work on. So I wouldn't want to venture into those territories without knowing more about it. Sorry for the unclear question. It's okay. About certain mystical dimensions of law and political theology. Law as ontology and canon law as civilians. Political theology, yeah. This gets in like Foucault territory. Do I have anything smart to say about that? I don't think so. I mean, I think that I guess what's salient to me about the question at some level is that that the Europeans at this time had a weird separation between religious and secular law, and where that bumps up against things is that where there's sort of overlap in their magisteria, such that the church treats of magic, learned magic or unlearned magic in one way, and the secular law treats of it in a different way. But I mean, the idea that the law exists as a metaphysical thing for which the church is an investigator and punisher, or adjudicator of those topics, certainly is a mystical dimension of the law. And again, when that butts up against questions of esotericism, like what is magic and can you do it, and what is astrology and can you do elective astrology or can you not? Those are questions that where the church is going to get directly involved, and those are things get, I think, at least for me and the material I work on, pretty interesting. This is a great question. How do you think the political economy of the academy influenced what it produced via funding via Plato's wealth? Everything. I'm a dialectical materialist, historical materialist. I mean, there's a reason why Plato posited the kind of metaphysics he did. And not just that, but I think as we'll cover the development of philosophy into Middle-Platonism, there's simply no talking about the development of Middle-Platonism without talking about the social material forces that are that are guiding it. And I'll talk a little bit about this on Sunday, where there's no way to talk about the development of Middle-Platonism in the early academy without talking about the rise of Alexander the Great and the effect that had on Athenian political economy. So those are huge parts of it. I mean, the fact that that Arcesilaus is given what 30 talents of silver or something like that as an inheritance when Crantor dies, that dramatically changes the kind of research program that's going to be going on at the academy, because of course when Arcesilaus inherits all this money and he leans into what becomes known as academic skepticism, that determines to a significant degree the research program of what they're going to be doing in the academy. So yeah, of course, the political economy is massive. And again, not to beat this drum too long, but this has been true of philosophy since the very beginning, as pointed out by Aristotle. You know, Aristotle famously said that philosophy begins in schole, it begins in leisure, and that means that the people doing philosophy are going to need to belong to a leisured class of people. You know, if your basic needs aren't met, if you're hungry or afraid, or there's people invading you or whatever, you don't really have time to sit around and think about whether or not the indefinite dyad is being acted upon by the one in order to generate geometricals. You're like, I need to eat. I need to not get killed by people with, you know, big pokey sticks. And that means that philosophy is going to emerge out of a leisured class with access to slaves to copy things down, with access to servants to wait on them hand and foot while they sit around and talk about things at symposia or whatever. So yeah, philosophy is always floating on the very upper crust in some degrees of society, and that's true of the academy, right? You think about someone like Crito, Crito, for whom there is a dialogue named, if I remember correctly, it's either Crito or Critias, but Crito was a member of the academy. He was one of Socrates' friends, and he was, I think, the wealthiest man in Athens. He was also, I think, one of the 30 tyrants that was installed after the defeat in the Peloponnesian War. So these people, Alcibiades, of course, also negotiated the surrender of Athens to Sparta. These people are all knee deep in the political economy of Athens, and therefore the philosophy is going to reflect or express those material realities. Lazy Cloud, thank you for the super sticker. Which is weird, by the way. I say that you know that the philosophy is going to express the material reality, but you could take an entire course in Greek philosophy and learn absolutely nothing about Greek history. It's as if they have nothing to do with each other. It's like you could take a whole class on the apology and you know the Phaedo and all that, and the Republic, and never learn that Socrates was a soldier, that he served, you know, in the Peloponnesian War, that he was decorated. You know, it's as if history is disconnected from ideas, because we have this very bourgeois way of doing philosophy, which I find to be lacking in the extreme. All right. Let's get some couple other chats before I got to get going here in about half an hour. When it comes to the Timaeus, do you buy the more literal interpretation or the more metaphorical one? I guess whether Plato, I guess you're asking whether Plato was a literalist or where he took it to be metaphorical. I tend to think that Plato did not take the Timaeus literally. And there are two reasons for that. One, he calls it a myth, right? He calls it a likely story, right? A likely story. A likely myth. And the fact that he doesn't put the Timaeus in Socrates' mouth the way that he likes to do when he thinks he's telling us something definitive, he doesn't do that. And so I think that what he's doing is, yeah, he's telling a non-literal story. He's telling a myth. And myths live for the Greeks in somewhere in between literal truths and metaphors. In fact, I think that's where myths live generally. And so I think that we as people who have been beleaguered by certain Protestant relations to Scripture. Right? All of us have kind of had some encounter with a particularly Protestant way of engaging with Scripture. The Greeks, there's no evidence that the Greeks engage with their Scriptures like that. And so we shouldn't Protestantize them. And secondly, Aristotle had every reason to consciously impugn to Plato and Xenocrates and the Academy beliefs they didn't have. So I don't buy. This is a place where I think Aristotle's I think he's strawmanning the Academy. I think he's strawmanning the Academy. So no, I tend to think that the academic position was a non-literalist understanding of the myth, because I think that's how the Greeks interacted with their myths. Right. Yeah, your description of Das Kapital as a Gothic horror novel changed the way I look at Marxism. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that, I think that reading Capital again as a monster, as as one of the many vampire stories that are floating around in Victorian England, whether it's Varney the Vampire or Dracula or Camilla or whatever. Marx just added his own very weird vampire story into the mix of the vampire literature, and I think that's definitely a place where it shows up. All right. So where did my interest in esotericism and witchcraft start? My interest in witchcraft started, I mean, historical witchcraft. I don't know anything about modern witchcraft, Wicca. That all started because I was wrapped up in the Satanic Panic, and I was curious about how the witch craze happened in history, and came to realize that, so surprise, surprise, that the witch craze never ended. That it's just shifted and mutated as a cultural meme, and so that was an interest that I developed in historical witchcraft. But esotericism is just a thing that I grew up studying, because I was interested in, vampires and Atlantis and Bigfoot and UFOs and all of that, and just like morphed eventually into an academic interest because I became skeptical but interested. Right, I never really believed in much of any of it, but I maintained that interest, and I still have it to this day. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm sorry I don't give you better. I'm not giving you better answers. I'm a young PhD in legal history. Very good. Very cool for you. Latin and Greek of the Middle Ages. Yeah, this is great. I mean, if you're interested in canon law, one of the texts that's just crying out for more focus are texts like the Formicarius and Nicholas Emmerich's Inquisitorum, De Directorium Inquisitorum, which I have right over there. These are just places where the Directorium Inquisitorum has never been translated, had a huge impact in many ways on the development of the Inquisition, and ultimately on secular and religious law. So there's tons of work to be done in that field, and I wish you the very best in that field. It's fascinating stuff, and I wish you absolutely the very best in terms of getting it done. Do I really listen to black metal? Yes, I really do listen to black metal. My kids refer to it as Abba's screaming music. So yes, I even force my children to listen to black metal sometimes in the car, not in a. It's sort of weird to be driving around in a van with your kids listening to black metal. You feel how old you are. I don't play it very loud, but yeah, I think. Although I think they like the black metal less than they like Wardruna. They like Wardruna. So, but what's the black metal record that I was playing them the other day? Oh, Transylvanian Hunger. I told my kiddo Zohar that there was a vampire music, and they wanted to listen to the vampire music, so I played them Transylvanian Hunger, and mixed reviews. They give the thumbs up, sideways thumb, or thumbs down. Transylvanian Hunger got sideways thumb, which they should have given it. Yeah, but what can you do? Any link between mysticism and new biotechnology? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything about new biotechnology. I'm not learned enough about that to give an opinion. So I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer. This is a great question, actually. Do you have thoughts about the role of misinterpretation in esotericism as a historical process? I imagine manuscripts/transmission are important here too. It's interesting how esotericism is so characterized by change. Yeah, I mean, this is just true of the transmission of basically anything, right? History is just, to Walter Benjamin's point, we're all playing the game of telephone, and history is just sort of a giant trash pile being pushed forward by the angel of history. But in esotericism, there's particularly funny moments where things meant to be jokes become taken seriously. Lilith is the best example of this. Lilith, the story of Lilith, that is to say, the specifically Jewish story of the first wife of Adam, who she wanted to be on top during sex, and Adam wasn't having it, so he kicked her out, and blah blah blah, and she comes back and harms all of Adam and Eve's children. That particular story was meant to be funny. It was meant to be a joke. It was meant to make fun of rabbinical lore. But then someone took it very seriously, and it became sort of like, oh, she's really real and very scary, and we need to get rid of her or whatever. And so this is a place where the most famous example of a demon, a demoness, started off as a joke, only to be taken seriously later. Or the Necronomicon, the Simon Necronomicon. That's not a real grimoire, but people took it seriously, especially these what are they, chaos magician people? And so this is where the history of esotericism, to me, is sort of it's a comedy of errors, where things taken seriously, things meant as jokes are taken seriously, and then things meant to be taken seriously just aren't read at all. So you get this kind of process in it. So no, misunderstanding, and again, the esotericists set themselves up for this, right? Because they write intentionally obscure things that are rife for misunderstanding. And so those systematic misunderstandings, again, I think about Aristotle with the active intellect. He's just writing something very weird. And this weird idea of the active intellect becomes the foundation for medieval theories of like mystical prophecy and Abulafia. So often when we historicize, we find that the history has this strange tendency, this hilarious tendency to be a comedy of misinterpretation. But misinterpretations and paradoxes are very productive. They're often very creative. And we end up with all kinds of wonderful innovations because of just that, just those processes. Does Kabbalah use as above, so below? Yes. Yeah, absolutely shows that. That concept absolutely shows up in the Zohar. And of course, the Zohar is being influenced by Neoplatonism, and Neoplatonism has this idea as well. So it's definitely in the Zohar. All right. Just getting... Couple more questions. Whoops, I did that one already. Do you or any commentators know of any non-biblical poetry that resembles the Song of Songs in style? You mean ancient poetry? I mean, there's lots of ancient love poetry, for sure. The Egyptians have some ancient love poetry that I know survives. There has to be some in Akkadian. I have to check, but I'm sure there is. I mean, we love writing about love and certainly heartbreak, but But yeah, I don't know of any specific text. I mean, I know it's Egyptian love song, but specifically like Akkadian or Sumerian texts or Canaanite text, Ugaritic. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. We're lucky anything survives at all. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I'm happy to share what I know, what little I know. I'm happy to share it. I think that's true of every educator in the world. They're more than happy to share what little we know. Luke the Yoda. It's a great name. Writing a screenplay about a 1000 AD German monk obsessed with hidden knowledge. I've begun to study Pseudo-Dionysius, Isidore, Hermeticism, and theurgy. Where does that path ultimately lead? A monk in 1000? I mean, they're gonna have access to very little material in 1000. Alchemy's not come over yet. Alchemy's still 100 years out, so they're not gonna have access to any alchemy. Picatrix has maybe just barely crossed over, so they might have a little access to some Islamic and astro magic, but not way off in Germany. They would be really in the frontier at that time. So yeah, I think if you want to have a monk, and Hermeticism also, they're gonna maybe have access to things like the books of the 24 philosophers, but they're not gonna have access to the Emerald Tablet yet. It's not gonna have come over from Arabic. So I think what you would want to do is bump your dates up a little bit. Get you closer to the 13th century, 14th century, and then there'll be a lot more access to stuff for you to deal with. But by 1000, there's they're gonna have not much material to work with. Thank you very much. Yeah. So Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Sledge, Rabbi Justin. Yeah, no rabbi. I'm not a rabbi, so I'm definitely not a rabbi. Just a civilian, but yeah, Shabbat Shalom. Yeah, a good Shabbos to anyone who is observing the Shabbat this evening. I'm looking forward to it. I need some Shabbos time. I need some Shabbos time. All right. Yes, Abba as in dad in Hebrew, not Abba as in Abba the band. But yes, Abba screaming music, my screaming music. But yeah, my kids are perplexed to me, or perplexed of me. New black metal recommendations. Listen to Krallis. I like Krallis a lot. They have like sort of esoteric black metal stuff. Liturgy, great sort of avant-garde black metal. The new Death Heaven album, which is sort of black gaze or whatever, but the new Death Heaven album is extremely good. I was really, I really wasn't into the previous couple of Death Heaven albums, but obviously, whatever Dreamhouse was just spectacular. But the new Death Heaven album is fantastic. All right, let's scroll and get a couple more questions. How long do I have? Yeah, about 20 more minutes. How far do you think this modern resurgence of Platonism could go? Are we collectively moving through this? Do you see any points that appear neglected? I mean, I think of someone like John Vervaeke, who's just a fantastic guy and just really terribly brilliant. I mean, I think that a kind of updated Neoplatonism is on the agenda. In fact, not just Neoplatonism, I think a sort of updated Iamblicanism is on the agenda. I really do think, and I see it kind of popping up from here and there, where people are interested in theurgy in a way that, in practical theurgy in a way that I don't ever remember people being that interested in. So I think that there's a ton of possibilities where this could go. Now, where I hope it doesn't go is people sacrificing animals or something, God forbid. But I could imagine it going all the way to full-blown neo-theurgy, which is funny because I think that they would end up with the pagan folks interested in Neoplatonic, Proclus, Iamblica style theurgy looking a lot like Catholics. Because there's a reason why the Catholics look the way they look. There's a reason why the Orthodox Church looks the way it does liturgically and ritually. It's because they're all doing theurgy back then. And it just so happens that the Catholic theurgy and Orthodox theurgy are the ones that survive. But I can easily imagine having walked into a temple of Isis or Athena or something, and it looking very similar, with the incense and all the other stuff, to late classical paganism. So yeah, I could easily imagine that you're going that direction, and there being new developments in Plotinus, or new elements in theoretical Neoplatonism. And again, I think of someone like John Vervaeke, who is kind of leaning in that direction. And I think this whole recent uptake in Orthodox Christianity and stuff are aside from these like alt-right kind of people, but I think there's an interest in adopting what people take to be a more theurgically rich form of Christianity. And of course, Orthodoxy and Catholicism have that on lock. I'm a fairly good draftsman. Are there any types of imagery you'd love to see more in art? One thing that I would love to see more depicted is Gnostic systems. Gnostic systems, all the different systems of Gnosticism. If there's only that one image of the Valentinian system way back in that French book, but I would love to see like people visually depicting the various Gnostic levels of reality. And I think if you're a decent draftsman, that would be a great thing, because you would have the analytical eye and the artistic eye. This is a little heretical. Should I say this? You can say this. It's whatever. It's heresy-friendly area here. But also, part of when I make episodes on Kabbalah, one of the most difficult things of making episodes on Kabbalah is that because Judaism is so aniconic, there's virtually no imagery, no art associated with the Kabbalah, because again, the aniconic nature of Judaism. And so I would love to see more depictions of Kabbalistic material. And again, that might get me into no territory, low territory with the Rabbonim, but it would definitely help me to have more imagery of this kind of stuff. But yeah, thank you. Hitting a wall, grasping, Kabbalah basics, Ziranpen, and I don't know what Nokia is. That's a phone, I think. I don't get it. Help. If you really want to get into that kind of stuff of the various countenances and stuff of God, the best text for that is Melila Kellner Eshed's book. What's the name of it? Seekers of the Face. Seekers of the Face. If you really want to get a clear analysis of those sections of the Zohar, Seekers of the Face is going to be your best bet. It's an absolutely fantastic book by a wonderful scholar. So I would go and check out that book. Question: as a creative and writer, I'm constantly looking for inspiration. What sensitivity should I have when borrowing from Merkava or Kabbalah or someone like Agrippa? What is verboten? Go folks. I'm of the mind that if you write stuff in a book and you publish that book, it's out there. I don't buy this whole like closed practice stuff. For me, if you've published a book, you can't cry about your secrets getting released. You did it. I get emails sometimes from Kabbalists or whatever. They're like, how dare you teach our secrets to the outside world or to non-Jews? And I'm like, you published the damn book. Like, if you publish the book, then that means you're putting it out there. And so, again, if someone came to me and said, look, like in our secret organization, we do X, Y, and Z, and I'd appreciate you not sharing this. And I wouldn't, right? I would keep people's confidence. I would keep anyone's confidence. If there was a secret religious group and they had spiritual stuff they wanted to talk to me about, I would keep it on the private. I would do that. Of course I would do that. I would keep anyone's confidence. But if your esoteric secrets are available on Amazon, they're neither esoteric nor secrets anymore. So I feel like be sensitive in the same way you'd be sensitive to anybody. If you're sitting next across to a person treat them with kindness, treat them with curiosity, treat them with the respect of deep research and deep learning. But at the end of the day, Merkava mysticism is published. Kabbalah is published. Agrippa is published. And that means that folks who are like you, who are an artist, a writer, a creative, let this be grist for your mill to make new stories and new legends and new stuff so that we can all benefit from it. So no, I'm not the kind of person who's going to get all, yeah, I'm not, that's not the way that I approach this stuff. Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate you sending over the Kabbalistic art. I'm all about some Kabbalistic art. If John Calvin were right, do we joy or despair? I think you do whatever you're predestined to do. If John Calvin were right, whatever it is that you're doing, you were meant to be doing that. So if you joy about Calvin being right, then you were predestined to do that. Although I think Calvin was not so hard on this predestination stuff. I think that's mostly Theodore Beza. That's a hot take. But yeah, if Calvin were right and you're predestined to joy, then you should be joyful. And if you're predestined to sadness, you should be sadness or despair. And therefore you're doing what the Lord willed you to do. And that's what you should be doing. This is a good question. What's your favorite angel in esotericism? Raziel, the secrets of God. I love the legend that after we were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God took mercy on us. And all of the secrets that Adam and Eve used to know before they were expelled from the garden, God allows Raziel to go up on top of the highest mountain and whisper at dawn the secrets that were lost to our ancestors, again, our mythological ancestors. And if you listen just at the right time, if you listen well enough, if you listen deeply, you can hear the angel Raziel whispering the secrets that have been lost to us, and we can recover them. And I love the idea that Raziel's doing us a solid by getting up on the mountain at dawn and whispering the secrets that we've otherwise lost. So Raziel is my favorite angel. Because the other ones are boring, Gabriel, Michael, whatever. Those are like Walmart angels. Everybody knows those angels. Raziel's also pretty well known. He's pretty well known. You mentioned Herculaneum in the Middle-Platonism video. Is there anything in particular you're hoping to see from the Villa of the Papyri? I mean, maybe I'll be spicy here and say, like, the most disappointing thing about the Villa of the Papyri is not that they're all toast, is that they're from an Epicurean library. Yeah, that's my anti-Epicurean screed of the week. I'm more on team Stoicism. No, I hope that some of the advanced technological advances in terms of digitally unrolling them are just breathtaking. And my hope, right, is that we recover just anything. We recover anything. I think of Xenocrates and Speusippus. That's 50 books, more than 50, 60 something books that have all been lost. Xenocrates, not even a single quotation from him survives. Chrysippus wrote 705 books and not a single thing survives, just fragments. So I'd love to see Chrysippus recovered. I'd love to see some of Aristotle's dialogues. Aristotle wrote dialogues. None of them survive. I'd love to see Aristotle's dialogues. Apparently he was really funny. I don't really believe that, but I think it's possible. But I would love to see his dialogue. So, I think that the most important thing we can probably do with those is just sit on them and wait until the technology gets advanced enough that we'll be able to recover at least some stuff in them. But, already we were recovering some words and some phrases, and so we're getting there. And again, it's moments like that really give me extreme hope for humanity. It's easy to despair when you look out the window and like, oh God. But the fact that we might be able to digitally unroll those fills me with tremendous hope. All right, folks, what time is it? Yeah, I got 10 more minutes left. Do you agree with Gregory Shaw that Platonism was designed to compete with Christianity to provide the common man a way to escape the lower worlds, or was this based on a misunderstanding of Plato as a dualist? This is a great question. I do think that. I do think that Iamblichus and Proclus are directly competing with Christianity. And we know that because they wrote books, or at least Proclus did, called Against Christianity. So there's no doubt at all that that they were self-consciously competing with Christianity, and there's no doubt that that competition took a religious form, and theurgy is a competition. So this is like theurgy wars between the pagans and the Christians. So yeah, I definitely think that I agree with this characterization. All right. Which mountain do we need to go to? I think that you can hear it from anywhere. I kind of always imagine it like I do ham radio, and sometimes you're trying to really key in on a specific, very weak signal, and you have to get everything just right, and you're trying to catch stuff bouncing off the moon or off the ionosphere. So I think it's not a question of which mountain are you on. I think it's a question of how are you listening. And I think if whatever to say, if you're listening right, maybe you'll hear Ozio. Um, does my wife, the rabbi, incorporate any of my stuff into her teachings? Does she? That's a good question. I should ask Rav Alana. I mean, I get to do Torah studies sometimes, so then I get to do like my own weirdo Kabbalah, you know, interpretation stuff. But no, I think my wife, in her infinite wisdom, is much more interested in actually having a practical impact on people's lives as opposed to teaching them a bunch of weird stuff about Plato. So if she does not, then it's probably all for the better. All right. Somehow I knew Chrysippus would come up. Of course, I love Chrysippus. Do folks remember like AOL Instant Messenger? I'm showing my age now. Instant Messenger and like IRC, like old chat relay stuff from back in the day. My handle from way back then was Chrysippus. So I'm a big fan of the dude. To put it mildly. I love that stuff. What does Parmenides mean by being? To on. Does he mean everything that exists, or the all, or does he mean some kind of underlying essence? I mean, who knows what he really means? I mean, I think that he means everything that is. I think he means just like the blunt fact of being, that there is, and what there is, and that is to on being. So I think that's what he means. Now, is it additive in the sense that if you take everything out here, like trash cans and trees, and add them all up, that the equal sign is you get being? I don't think that, because I think that Parmenides believed that this is all an illusion. That this is this is the way of opinion. That when I see three trash cans separate from each other, traveling through time, moving their position slightly, I'm experiencing opinion. I'm not experiencing aletheia. I'm not experiencing truth. So I think that it's not additive. I don't think that's how you get to being. I think that you get there by understanding it logically, purely logically. All right, a couple more questions before we wrap up. Oh my God, he does live streams? Yes, I do live streams. I try to do them once a month. Because again, I try to do this in a way that I meet with my patron folks with office hours. One of the benefits of supporting Esoterica on office hours or on Patreon is that you get access to office hours where we just like hang out and like talk about whatever. But I don't want to make it such that the channel is completely paywalled in terms of being able to interact with you guys, because I love this. I love interacting with you guys. And so live streams are a fantastic way of being able to interact and do some, answer some questions and hang out. So yeah, that's my one of the things I love to do. All right, just a couple more questions and I'm going to call it a day. What is your opinion on consciousness? Is it a doorway, an end goal, or a parasite? I think it's a persistent delusion. I am in the very unpopular camp of people like Daniel Dennett and Paul and Patricia Churchland, that I am what is called a limitivist materialist. I don't think consciousness is real. Now I know that some of you are going to go, that's a performative contradiction. You just said I think. Yeah, it's a very persistent delusion, but I don't think it exists either as an emergent property, because I don't even know what emergence means really. People wave their hands and talk about emergence all the time, so I'm not sure that it's emergent from the brain chemistry, because I'm not even sure metaphysically what that means to talk about emergence, and I definitely don't believe it's a substance, a la Descartes. So I am of the belief with people like Dennett and the Churchlands that most of what we call philosophical psychology is just folk psychology, and that I do not believe that consciousness, I think there are no good arguments to say that consciousness exists. And of course you're going to say, well, I'm experiencing it. Well, people experience vivid hallucinations and those don't exist. So we were fairly confident, and again, my mind is hallucinating things all the time. My brain is hallucinating things all the time to make me think that I'm experiencing the world the way that I am, but we know that that's just not true. So just from neurobiology. So yeah, I'm a limitivist materialist. I know that's a bit deflationary for some people for whatever reason. It seems to also just elicit like strong emotional responses from people, which I've never quite understood why people get like angry at me being a limitivist. But yeah, I'm not super keen on consciousness existing, or rather, I don't think it does. What of the zeitgeist? Could it be the mind or the collective beliefs of ourselves, as in the zeitgeist of a nation or city? I don't know. I don't know that I believe in a zeitgeist. I believe that material conditions give rise to social conditions, and so, unsurprisingly, when there are shared material conditions, we get specific arrangements of social conditions. But I don't think that exists in itself. It doesn't have some kind of essence or being that is unique to itself. Okay, thank you for I appreciate your email. I'll take a look at it after I get done with the live stream. I appreciate that. What made you lose your belief in God? I don't know that I ever had one, to be honest. And again, belief is such a I don't know. It's such a Protestant thing. I think it's like a Christian thing, really. I don't know. I find belief to be very uninteresting in the end. That people assent to propositions that they don't have catalepsis of. Again, I think that most people don't have, and again, this is where I'm very stoic. I don't think that most people have belief. I think they have opinions. Because belief, especially justified true belief, requires some stronger kind of assent to cataleptic impressions, and I don't think most people ever experience those, if they're even experienceable. So it's not that I did or didn't believe, it's just I find the question about the existence of gods, not God, gods, I find it to be largely an uninteresting question. What is your opinion of the legitimacy of optimistic versus pessimistic nihilism? If you're a nihilist, is anything your problem? I mean, I guess the question is, what do you mean by nihilism? Which is to say, like that, like, so optimistic nihilism is sort of like Buddhism, like old school Buddhism, like Siddhartha Buddhism. I mean, I guess I'm something like a metaphysical pessimist, in the sense that if on the balance sheet I had to, if I could somehow go back in time, and there was a button like create the universe or don't create the universe, I would have immediately clicked don't create. So in the sense of, like, I'm kind of Gnostic in the sense that I think this is probably all a mistake. But yeah, so I guess if that's nihilism. But also, I'm like, again, I agree with the rabbis. The rabbis also said in the Gemara that the existence of human beings was a mistake, but we're here, so we got to make the best of it. You need to be righteous. So I think that even if our existence is contingent, and maybe it would have been better if we didn't exist, that we're here and we should make the best of it. certainly not be jerks. All right. Have I ever seen True Detective? Yes. Rust Cole is my is my if I could have a cheerleader in my life, it would be Rust Cole from season 1 of True Detective. That'd be the one. If I could have like a cheerleader, I would be Rust. Um, but yeah, I love True Detective. It's fantastic. All right. Yeah, you're right. Saying the brain creates consciousness in the same way that it creates hallucinations is, I think, something most neuroscientists would agree with. I'm a little surprised it's controversial in philosophy. Yeah, philosophy is always trailing behind the sciences. Yeah, I just feel like it's all hallucinations. Like it's all hallucinated. So yeah, I find it to be again, what you talk to neuroscientists and they say something, and then philosophers freak out because they think silly philosophers think they have philosophers and religious people think they have some kind of weird monopoly on the nature of consciousness or something, which is just sort of laughable. All right, folks. Oh, Matt. It was great meeting you at the Moon's Rare Books. Yeah, it was fantastic to meet everybody. It was great. Jorge had asked if you plan to do a follow-up on the Petasiris video. Probably not. I think I've said everything I'm gonna say about the Petasiris stuff. It's funny. Some people have asked me like, "Are you gonna publish that?" And I'm like, "I did publish it." And if academics or whatever people wanted to take a look at it, they can all take a look at it, and they can, if you want to quote it, you can quote it from the video. But yeah. All right, last couple ones. I appreciate that. Thank you guys. No, it's thanks to you guys that I get to make all this. So it's my with great gratitude that I feel like I get to make all this. Well, I make a video on William of Conch. Yes, I was just reading about him in Thorndike, and in the Thorndike, I was just reading about him. So yes, I'm definitely going to be coming back to him and doing an episode on him at some point. Um, so definitely we'll be making a video about him at some point in the Spiritus Mundi. All right. No, I appreciate the super sticker. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm literally glad that people are digging the Middle-Platonism course. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. All right, everybody. Well, I'm going to sign off. About a half an hour and a half. I don't see how these streamers are on for like 8 hours. I just don't understand how anyone could do that. But at any rate, yeah, thank you guys. Always wonderful to hang out. I really appreciate again taking the time to hang out with me in the middle of a Friday. And I'll be back on Sunday with another episode of the Middle-Platonism seminar. I'll be doing that live with my patrons on Sunday. And then if you want to join live, feel free to join the Patreon. And then that'll hopefully roll out sometime next week. And then, like I said, I'm probably going to do a video on a Gnosticism video. Either that or Paracelsus. Probably Gnosticism. So maybe look for that next week. But all right, everybody. Again, I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me and the support of the channel, all the kind comments, wonderful questions. You guys have a great evening. And yeah, I really appreciate everything you've done, and make the channel possible. So thank you guys, and I'll see you guys on the next live stream here in the next, I don't know, month or so, something like that. All right, everybody, take care. Have a great night. Good Shabbos. Take care of yourself.